How often is it that when I meet with somebody and they are diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, they're told it's genetic and there's nothing you can do about it and just have to live with it? And usually that happens after you've tried to do certain things, right? Maybe it's where you tried your diet or tried taking supplements or exercising. And it's very easy to kind of blame someone down the line, right? Maybe it's mom's fault, dad's fault. Some people blame their parents for everything that goes bad, so it could be a factor. Or maybe you have an aunt or an uncle or somebody else. Somebody actually just, you may kind of go through your memory and say, I remember an uncle or an aunt or a family member who went through diabetes, so it's got to be genetic. So on this video right now, what I'm going to do is actually go into, well, is type 2 diabetes genetic and what's the real facts behind that? So buckle up, hang on. We have a lot to go over, but you're really going to get a lot out of this because if we could really debunk this myth, right, you're going to really understand more about type 2 diabetes and what to do about it. All right, so here we go. So it's really interesting to see, right? Because there was actually a really big study that was done many years ago. And in this study, what we find is that basically from 1990 to 2003, they basically conducted one of the most ambitious and important scientific endeavors in human history. Now, you got to imagine all the amazing things that we have accomplished over time and all the amazing endeavors that we've come across, like going to the moon and other things, such as finding even insulin and other health breakthroughs. We have to look at, well, what is really going on underneath the surface when it comes to this whole entire idea of genetics and diabetes. So it's pretty remarkable because in October 1990, Congress actually established funding for the Human Genome Project. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, basically what that means is that we funded, me, you, other people, we funded actually a whole entire set of testing to do with genetics and whether or not it actually affects type 2 diabetes. And the actual completion date, believe it or not, was set for 2005. So that means that they studied this for a long time, and we spent obviously a lot of money doing this. Okay. The total cost of this project was $2.7 billion, and that's in 1991 dollars. So we spent a lot of money to really try to figure out whether genetics played a big role as type 2 diabetic and other diseases, right? They're thinking like, well, maybe if this gene mixes with this gene, it could maybe be the reason why someone has a disease, or maybe it's because the way they act, or maybe another problem that they're facing. Well, it is pretty remarkable because we spent a lot of money on this particular study, right? Because a lot of people want to know, well, is diabetes related to my genetic predisposition? Maybe it is in the genes, and that's why there's no hope. And maybe that's why I'm bound to being on diabetic medication or insulin or other things like that. So, what was the results? We spent all this money. We want to really figure out as a taxpayer, well, is there actually a gene for this? And what exactly is going on? And maybe if they found the gene, it could be the answer. Maybe this is the exact answer we're looking for to actually find a solvable answer to type 2 diabetes and make millions of people actually now better. So what they did was they actually completed this project in 2003 and didn't find a gene for type 2 diabetes. And it would be pretty easy if they did, because then all of a sudden maybe they can alter the genes and then that would actually eradicate all the diabetes in the world, which would be absolutely amazing, right? If that was possible, that would be pretty remarkable. But the truth be told is actually that is not the actual answer, and there's got to be something else. You could actually even go and check this out yourself. If you go to genome.gov, you could see these remarkable doctors and scientists that actually did this entire study to see whether or not type 2 diabetes is genetic. And honestly, it's pretty remarkable. They did all of that. They spent all this money and unfortunately didn't come out with the result that any of us wanted to see. Because it would be really awesome if there was an answer under a genetic predisposition from mom and dad and aunts and uncles that you were a diabetic, but honestly there isn't. But there are other things that are really important, and that is the next step of the process. And now let's get into what could be factors related to type 2 diabetes and what could be going on under the surface? So what I've come across is that there are actually 16 contributing factors to type 2 diabetes. And I want to actually dissect each one of them. This way you have a better glimpse. So I know we just talked about the whole genetic predisposition, but actually I think this will actually help you more understand a little bit of what could have gotten us here in the first place. All right, so let's go slide by slide here. Okay, the first thing we look at is family history. Now, we already know that there's no genetic predisposition. However, maybe the environment, right, that you experienced when you were a child, right, like the learning habits you had, maybe even how active you were your parents the ones that kind of let you stay inside and read all day, or were you active and playing sports, sleeping patterns, right, were you staying up late at night, doing things you shouldn't be doing, or watching late night movies or TV or reading books or whatever, and also reward systems. How common is it for someone to go and actually have a bad reward system? Meaning every single time they do something well or you do something well, you get a treat and a dessert, right? Sometimes we even have that ingrained in our own way of doing things. It's like, hey, you did really well, here's a reward, and that reward is junk food. It's probably not a great reward system, right? It may be better off if your parents gave you a few dollars after you did something well, or even how you reward it yourself. Some people, when they accomplish something really important, instead of doing something abusive like drinking more alcohol or eating bad food, they may do something proactive. Maybe they go and buy another book, or maybe they go and they get a massage or something else that is actually gratifying, right? I know my mom was pretty notorious for when she did something good or accomplished something, she would get her nails done. She would have like a pamper day, and that's actually a pretty good reward system. But even though the genetic part isn't there causing diabetes, there could be an environmental factor, and that's how you grew up with these eating habits and the activity levels and sleeping patterns, and also your reward system. Okay, the next thing let's look at is the actual distribution of fat to weight, right? So your body basically becomes more resilient to insulin, right, and resistant to it, and the hormone leptin, which actually controls appetite. So the more fat you have, especially around the middle, the more this actually causes more problems. So it is good to make sure that your body composition isn't actually creating more insulin resistance. So if you have had kind of that tire around the belly, that is a factor that has been linked to diabetes. And what it's really saying is not that it's actually diabetes, like if you have that, but it does say that that hormone leptin is actually a big factor. So by getting yourself better, right, and getting these things fixed and getting these hormones better, it actually basically can help you not only control your appetite, but also look better, right, and feel better in your clothes, right? So that is also a really important thing. The next thing we look at is a sedentary lifestyle, right? So I think everybody knows that when you are going and sitting down all day, right, your body is basically not moving. Now, a lot of times you see these experts, quote unquote, or fitness gurus talking about, well, calories in, calories out if you burn more calories. But that doesn't answer all the questions, because we all know people who exercise every day. I had a person that used to deliver my mail. They would walk 10 miles a day and they were still overweight. So you would think that you're walking that far that you would actually, be able to lose a lot of weight, but this person unfortunately couldn't. But extended period of time when you are actually sitting there, it actually causes more inflammation because your body is sitting there spastic. The muscles are sitting there. And that disability that you're getting from not using your muscles causes a lot of problems. Also, the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it, right, does happen. So it is important that your muscles move around, you're utilizing sugar, your body has a good circulation to it. But a sedentary lifestyle is a problem because it doesn't actually help the body function better. And remember, you want to get the body functioning better in order to regulate blood sugar levels and also feel better as well. And also hold down the inflammation, which is really important because diabetes is an inflammatory disease, as everybody knows. All right. The next thing we look at is race. Now, yeah, you're probably familiar with this, is that when a lot of races come over to America and we eat the Western diet, the burgers, the fast food and all of that, they're likely to actually cause more metabolic issues, right? So these metabolic issues affect a lot of different cultures. We look at the Hispanic culture, Black culture, Hawaiian culture. Native Americans have a big issue, and also even Asian descent. There's some parts of Asia, because I traveled to Southeast Asia before doing a mission study, and they can't consume certain alcohols. So even like when they come over to America and they want to be an American and do the American things like drinking and such, it actually could lead to a lot more problems. So yes, there are vulnerabilities related to race. It's not the only reason, but it is when these cultures and sometimes come over to America and they eat the way the sick American eats. So you don't want to do that. The next thing we look at is age, right? So now they have done studies where they see that as you get older, actually after the age of 45, you probably have a higher risk factor related to diabetes, right? And also we got to look at the fact that when you start getting older, you've accumulated more problems. You've eaten more cupcakes, you've had more pancakes, you've had more bread and pastas and those things, right? So that accumulation does have a factor. Now, it also is like kind of like the snowflake effect. If you've ever read my first book that I wrote, I talk about the snowflake phenomena that comes on, right? So, you look at most people, and we already know that diet is not always the number one thing, but it's a snowflake, right? You take one snowflake, you put it on a branch, it doesn't do anything. It's a snowflake. It doesn't even weigh anything, right? But you add snowflake after snowflake after snowflake, and eventually that branch comes down. And that's essentially what happens a lot of times with diets, right? So, if you refer back to when you were a kid, I don't know if one donut is going to make the world change, right? But you add donut after donut after donut and things like that, you basically keep getting the body out of balance, and that's how problems happen. So even though there is no genetic predisposition, if your family does things like this, where they're eating the wrong foods and they have these habitual things, I know culturally, even in my house, I'm a half Italian. So, my grandmother, would cook there with that big, huge thing of pasta. And that was like a tradition, right? It became a tradition. So those traditions could sometimes lead to problems. But as you get older and older and older, it makes it harder because you've had more imbalances that have occurred. One of the things you'll know is that when I start any patient on any care plan, the first thing we work on is getting the body back to balance by doing a cleanse and getting the body functioning. And it's pretty remarkable because I see patients in their 60s feeling like they're in their 20s again, because we're just getting rid of all of this residue from the years of accumulating all of these bad habits. Okay, so there's still hope. All right, so just because you've gotten older doesn't mean you can't turn back time a little bit. All right, the next thing we look at is gestational diabetes. So this is when someone is going through birthing, right? They're having a child, and they're going through a point in time where their body starts getting out of whack, right? All of a sudden, as a mom, if you have had or had a child, is that all the energy goes to the baby, right? Mom becomes less important, and keeping this baby alive and well is number one thing. Well, with that being said, it is not uncommon. I remember my wife, I would always joke with her when we had our first child, that she would be able to smell a cupcake 4 miles away like she's a shark, right? Like, sharks can smell blood and water. And it was pretty funny. And I think that did happen. We at that time I lived in New Jersey, and we would travel in New York City quite a bit. And, there was times where she's like, I can smell a bakery. And I'm like, there's no bakery around. What's going on? But anyway, those cravings, right? These ridiculous cravings and lifestyle things at that time and hormone imbalances go crazy. And it could lead to issues related to your pregnancy, right? Which is that gestational diabetes. Now, the thing I see is that if the body can come back after the baby's born, the hormones can re-regulate, usually not a problem. But very seldom do I see that happen, right? You have a child, and now you're late at night trying to take care of your baby, and the stresses, they're waking up in the middle of the night. Those sort of things really throw the body off. And sometimes, I should say not even sometimes, many times I see women not recover. Even if the baby that caused all these issues is now 40, 50, 60 years old, right? And they're older in their life, it still could be a factor. So this is something that's really important, and it's kind of overlooked because if those imbalances stay in place, well, it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? So this is number 6, gestational diabetes. The next thing we look at is actually there have been studies done where when your baby is bigger, right, over 9 pounds, that there is a risk factor of more problems. And this goes back to what I was just mentioning. The body could be more out of balance, right? The hormones could be more of a factor. Maybe the diet was worse during that time. So when you have a bigger baby, it does create more stresses to the body. And then also it could be, how did the baby get so big? Was it genetic, right? Where the baby is just a bigger baby just due to genes for the mother and father? Or was it the fact that there was just bad habits? The person was eating too many carbs along the way, all right? So this could be a big factor related to that as well. The next thing we look at is prediabetes. Now, if you followed me and studied me long enough, I don't believe in prediabetes. Either you have a blood sugar problem or you do not. So what prediabetes is basically when your A1C goes over 5.7, right? Starts going up 5.7, 5.8, it gets into that 6 range, and now all of a sudden, the doctor comes in and says you're pre-diabetic, give you the basic spiel, watch what you eat, lose some weight, whatever. But it's the fact that you have a blood sugar problem is the issue, right? And that is something that has to be addressed in order for anybody to get better. It's not a matter of, well, are you really sick as a type 2 diabetic and now you have a disease, or do you have a blood sugar problem? And I always say nip it in the bud and handle it before it becomes a diabetic issue, right? Before that blood sugar level comes down. And you'd be surprised how many times that your diabetes is directly related to an earlier problem, right? Blood sugar problems, earlier issues with not balancing your blood sugar. The person who wakes up in the morning, drinks a cup of coffee, goes to work, doesn't eat till 2 o'clock. It's like the recipe for breaking a metabolism. Like if you ever want to break a metabolism, do that, right? Just neglect yourself, don't eat, and get stimulants all day, right? Which is unfortunately sometimes the American way of doing things. So prediabetes number 8 does have a big factor. All right, let's continue along. The next one we look at here is actually who you surround yourself with, right? So we could see in social circles, right, the people you hang out with, they have a big effect on whether or not you eat healthy or not. I have been kind of lucky because many of my friends are doctors, or they practice similarly to me, or they follow in my footsteps with the way they eat. So it's pretty easy when I have an event that goes on, a birthday party or something else that is obviously a social gathering. But how often do we see it where like someone goes and the job you have, someone's going to bring the food in, and this food is all like bad stuff, cookies, cakes, donuts, things of that nature. And you're just wondering probably like, hey, does my boss really like me? Like, why are they giving me all the wrong food, especially during the holidays? So, the lifestyle habits you have and also the people closest to you also have an effect. Family members, friends, coworkers, if they're all eating bad, it's common that you may do the same thing. Right? What's that phrase they say, right? Birds of the same feather flock together. And it's common where if all your friends allow for a bad diet or a bad lifestyle, you may fall in suit of that because that's what's acceptable, right? Like that is really acceptable where, hey, we're going to eat bad food, or hey, we're going to drink alcohol, or we're going to do all the wrong things. If that becomes the way the group thinks and the way the group operates and the amount of health knowledge that group uses, it's kind of hard to actually get yourself better. This is why I tell patients, like, you want to make sure everybody's on the same team, right? Especially like your significant other, right? You don't want to have 2 refrigerators in a house, one refrigerator being, the healthy refrigerator, and then the other one being the sick refrigerator. So it's good when you have that social circle, which gets everybody on the same page. All right. So another really big factor to related to diabetes. So in a lot of my webinars, as well as when I talk to patients, it's not uncommon for me to see that when someone becomes a type 2 diabetic, prior to that, like even way earlier, they were actually diagnosed with hypothyroidism. Now, you may know this or not, but I actually was diagnosed with hypothyroidism years ago. And I was actually even testing something called an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's. And it's basically the researcher that figured out that the body gets attacked, right? And when the thyroid gets attacked, the name of it is called Hashimoto's. So when a lot of people are diagnosed with hypothyroidism, they look for something called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, TSH has a particular range it needs to be at in order for your body to function the best. It needs to be at a certain range. This way, everything goes good. But what happens a lot of times is the antibodies actually attack the thyroid tissue. And it makes for a lot of problems. It makes you intolerant of certain foods. It makes things become a big issue. And the bigger problem is that the majority of hypothyroidism is this autoimmune disease. But in our current health system, and I don't think it will ever change, unfortunately, they're not really addressing the root imbalances there. And it could be a major big factor. And there's something called a 1.5 diabetic, which I talk about in my book, and I also talk about on other videos, where this type of diabetic is usually the hardest to actually help because they have two different diseases. They have a metabolic disease on one side, and on the other side, they have an autoimmune disease. So hypothyroidism plays a big role in whether or not someone could become a type 2 diabetic and have blood sugar problems. The other thing is the thyroid, really, really, really important for regulating blood sugar, weight, energy, those sort of things, really, really important. The next thing we look at is PCOS. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. What the heck is that? Well, it's basically when your body is making too many cysts. Poly means many, right? It makes too many cysts. This is not supposed to happen. And a lot of times I see this in women, especially when they started noticing things, right? Maybe it's harder for them to lose weight. Maybe they're feeling a little bit more aggressive. Maybe they're more moody. Hair is growing in places they do not like. And PCOS is a pretty serious thing, and it has to do with hormones converting. I talk about this quite a bit in my book and other things, but this is a really important factor. So this goes back to that hormone imbalance. So just because later in life you get diagnosed as a diabetic doesn't mean something triggered it years and years ago. You may be thinking to yourself, well, you know, I'm past the age of 60. I had something like this when I was a kid, or after, you know, when I was in my 30s and, you know, I had a hysterectomy. But that doesn't mean the mechanism of what caused that PCOS is still not in place. So now you're struggling. You were struggling way back then, but now you have a different disease. So something really, really important when we look at what could be really triggering behind a type 2 diabetic. The next thing we look at is something called hypertension, right? Hypertension is high blood pressure. So this includes the whole cascade of issues, right? You have the issues of the weight, the blood sugar, the blood pressure, the cholesterol, all goes in one fitting here. So this has to show that the body's out of balance. That's basically what you're looking at. And actually everything I've mentioned so far, and all 16 of these, will actually be because the body is out of balance. So by having these conditions, it basically means something's out of balance and it's not being addressed. So this predisposes you for other illnesses, as you know, but it's all connected. You understand? Like, even though we could sit here and we're like, oh, well, it's definitely the hypertension, they're all interconnected. The thyroid related to your eating habits, related to your body's ability to regulate blood sugar level, the blood pressure, they're all intertwined. And that's why some people get pretty confused, because if they just go after one thing, it doesn't lead to a solution. The next one here is Acanthosis nigricans. And what this is basically, it's the under armpit folds and skin that becomes darker and thicker, and actually it becomes more velvety, and it's a skin disorder. Now, what is this? It's basically the body getting very thick and inflamed due to blood sugar issues and other factors. There is links to this particular condition related to having blood sugar problems, also weight issues. So sometimes you even see this on body folds, right? Like, especially if you gain a lot of weight, or even armpits and things of that nature. So you'll see this where the skin becomes thicker, almost like kind of leathery, and also darker. This also plays a role in blood sugar levels. Okay, so if you're a patient in my office, obviously we want to watch on gluten. But this is a really big issue. Gluten nowadays is a big topic. I put a lot of videos out on this particular topic. But because of the gluten and the amount of inflammation people get when they eat gluten, gluten is the protein in wheat, it does relate out to increased blood sugar levels. I'm not going to go deep dive into it right now on this particular presentation, but if you do search out other videos that I put out, I do actually go into deep depth. But here is the thing, we want to make sure we eliminate and stay away from gluten, because that creates an inflammatory response. So you want to stay away from that, especially as a type 2 diabetic. The next thing we look at is poor sleep cycles. Now, I talk about this quite a bit on webinars and patients who I work with in my office. We look at something called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And this is where sleep patterns come in and brain rhythms. Well, there's a lot of things that go on in sleep, and that's not really what the purpose of this particular presentation is. But when you start seeing sleep cycles go off, why? Well, you're waking up in the middle of the night because you're taking medication and makes you pee a lot, right? Or you're seeing that your blood sugar levels are high and you're going to the bathroom over and over again. Well, this does affect cortisol levels and stress hormones, and it does make it harder for your metabolism to get going. And this leads on to obesity and other weight issues, especially like people have heard of like CPAP machines and sleep apnea. Well, if you're having an apneic response to the body, that means your body stops breathing. That's not good. And that's something that you need to make sure is functioning correctly. But a poor sleep cycle actually does affect a lot. Now let's get into the last thing we want to talk about here related to what could be affecting and causing blood sugar levels to go up that can link to type 2 diabetes. And that is going to be a background of having a stroke, right? So if you've had so many imbalances in your body and your body is actually clotting and causing issues related to your heart and you've had a stroke, well, obviously your risk factors associated with it and blood sugar levels, because the whole system is related, right? They're all intertwined and interconnected, so they all have to work together. So this is why if you've had a cardiovascular event, such as a stroke, then it actually raises your risk factors to being a diabetic. Because why? Because your body was out of balance, big time out of balance in order for the stroke to happen in the first place. So diabetes somehow just creeps within that, and that actually leads to more and more problems. So what I'd like to do now is I want to kind of change speeds a little bit, and let's talk about the things you actually can do, and you actually can have a better glimpse of what to do to actually get yourself better and to actually improve your type 2 diabetes. So hold on, here we go, round number 3. So you're wondering, what is the root problem? Okay, we got into all these slides. We started out first saying, well, it's genetic, or it's got to be genetic. And now we're looking at the fact that, well, maybe it's not genetic, and all these other 16 other things do play a contributing role. But now the question is, well, what is exactly the root problem? So I always tell people this is really what it looks like, right? So if we come over here and we look at this, right, this iceberg would be similar to your overall body, right, and your overall health. What we know about essentially is on the top of this iceberg. That's really all we know, right? We know about the fact that, there's a chance that, let me erase this so you can see it. So we know that there is diabetes, right? That's one issue. There's weight struggle, there's low energy, there's potentially neuropathy, heart issues, blood pressure, and all this, right? Well, the way our society works is, what do? Well, we come in here and we start going and trying to treat this with drugs, right? We go, we put all the medications out there, right? Your insurance will pay for that. Or some people actually take supplements, right? They take vitamins to try to handle it, right? So if they have diabetes, there's like 1,000 things out there that you could buy on Amazon that treat the symptoms of your body, right? Like diabetes. Some people try to diet here, some people try to exercise. The problem is, this is the top of the iceberg, right? If anybody knows anything about an iceberg, the largest part is on the bottom, right? All of this down here is what is the bigger picture. And what sits down there is what essentially is causing the top. So you can see all this stuff on top that is caused by the bottom. So what really goes on under diabetics? And I've been doing this a long time, helping tens of thousands of people. And I'll tell you that when you start chasing the top here, the diabetes, the blood pressure, the weight struggle, and all that, you don't really get anywhere. You get pretty frustrated because you're thinking, oh, what's the next diet? What do I need to eat? Or what's the best exercise program? And it doesn't leave a lot of hope. And it's very frustrating. It's exhausting. It's expensive, right? I mean, keep on taking more and more drugs and it leads on to bigger and bigger problems. Or taking more and more supplements, right, that aren't working. It's expensive, right? Because if you pay $1 and it doesn't work, it puts you in the wrong direction. That's a waste of $1. Whereas if you took $100 and it puts you in the right direction, then that's a much better investment in your health. So let's look at the bigger picture, and this is what really goes on. So on the bottom of this whole equation, right, is all of these things that sit below it, right? We look at something called the adrenal issues. We look at feed-forward bidirectional vicious cycles. We look at infection, hormone imbalance, dysbiosis, toxins, the liver. I've never seen a proper functioning liver in a diabetic, by the way. Mold, we have inflammation, thyroid, HPA axis, autoimmune, and metabolic blocks. And essentially what happens in my office is that patients that I work with, we actually just start going and erasing each area, right? And I use the word erase loosely, but we start getting all these things back to where they should be, right? And by doing that, what it does is essentially makes this iceberg smaller and smaller. And boy, my screen is really looking ugly right now, but you get the point, right? So it makes this iceberg smaller and smaller, and thus you'll see the diabetes start going away and improving. And you start seeing the weight go better, and you start seeing energy improve, neuropathy get better. And that's not because we're treating the neuropathy, it's that we're getting to the root imbalance. And that is what I think, that's where the magic is, right? That's where really, if you want to see a cool magic show, that's where it is. It's on the bottom here. And yes, it requires work. Yes, it requires some strategy, quite a bit of strategy, and protocols and those sort of things. But that is really how patients are able to get better throughout all this. Okay, so anyway, if you have these things on the bottom going on, and it's not being addressed, that is why people continue to struggle needlessly, in my opinion. So this is a lot of information, and I know we started with genetics, right? But we got all the way over to all the things that contribute to type 2 diabetes. So I hope you really got a lot out of this, and I hope you really, really enjoyed the information here, because this could actually really make an improvement in your overall quality of health. Thank you for watching. If you want more information, you can visit my website, www.drjspages.com. I have tons of free things on there. I have recipes, I have ebooks, I have courses on there, even supplements that I recommend. So check that out. But I hope you got a lot out of this, and be well, stay well. Thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Take care.